Hello and welcome to the webinar After the DevOps Architecture, Navigating Through a Successful DevOps Implementation, hosted jointly by Zivra and our software partners GitHub, Puppet, and Sonatype. Our presenters today is Kim Megahee, co-founder and senior DevOps practice director at Zivra. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of question and answer. James Jones from Puppet, Chris Weber from GitHub, and Curtis Yanko from Sonatype will also be available for question and answer. Throughout the presentation, please type product-specific questions that you may have into the chat box, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will hand it over to Kim. Kim.
Hi, thanks, Jill. And welcome, everyone. We have attendees here from North and South America, from Europe, and from India. And I believe in the Pacific Rim, so we'd like to say welcome. We're glad you're here. And thanks, Jill, for that introduction. I'm going to quickly give you a picture here so you can see James and Curtis and Christian. They've already been introduced by Jill, but I wanted to make sure that you get a look at what they look like so you can put a face with a name. And we'll go ahead and proceed. So a little bit about Zivra. We're a boutique IT style company. We came from Accenture, most of us, so we've all had a lot of experience working with DevOps. You can see from the map that we mostly are congregated around North and South America, but we do some business in, I was just back from New Zealand. We do some business over in Europe and a lot of other places. To go ahead, a little bit of the idea of what we do. We do a lot of strategy consulting. We have people who have been there and done that, and so a lot of experience with a lot of tools we have together, and just a lot of history with helping people do DevOps. So I want to talk about a little bit of fundamentals first. Just first things first, and all successful endeavors really do have to have three things at the core, and that's process, tools, and people or expertise. So at the beginning of your implementation, the decisions you make about these things can hurt you or can help you. So you want to make sure that you do your best to make a good decision in those areas. Here's a little bit about these areas. First of all, everything really does revolve around process. There are a lot of whiz-bang tools, there are a lot of whiz-bang people out there, but the process is at the base of everything else. So creating a sound process that works, and then you use the tools and the people to implement that process. About tools, you want to do the best you can to pick the best tool for a job. For example, you can drive a screw with a hammer. It'll get it done, but it'll damage the wood and create instability down the road. So you want to get the best tool that you can for the job. The third thing is, of course, people, and having qualified, trained resources working in DevOps is really far better than just leaving it to chance and letting someone just have a go at it. If you have qualified resources, they know what the risks are, they know how to avoid them, they know what the best practices are, and they'll get more work done faster. So I wanted to show you a little bit of a sample reference architecture here. This probably looks familiar to most folks. You can see our guest vendors here scattered about. So you have a diagram, probably something like this, for your organization, for your applications. If you don't, I would recommend that you draw it out. One of the things we find out is when we actually put it to paper, draw it out, we start to find things like maybe bottlenecks, stuff that slow us down, and the stuff that maybe is not really clear how it works and maybe needs improvement. So it's a good idea to put it down on paper. I want to touch a little bit on some of the DevOps best practices. These are a lot of them would be considered no-brainers, but what I do want to mention is that implementing version control and automating your environment provisioning configuration, those two items are foundational. A lot of the other stuff you can't really do until you get those in place. So, or you can't do it well, I should say. Now, a question we get asked a lot, the IT media talks a tremendous amount about new technology, and they kind of leave out legacy. And one of the questions we get a lot is, can I use DevOps techniques to improve things in my legacy systems? And the answer is absolutely yes, as long as you have tools that can support your processes. All the same things can be done. You can do automated build, automated deployment, continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery. You can do all of those things. Now, will you be able to deploy 10,000 times a day? Maybe not. The more complex your system is, the less likely you're going to be able to deliver that often. But the point I want to make is that you can definitely get some improvements in your legacy systems by applying good, sound DevOps techniques. We wanted to spend some time talking about some challenges that we've seen in the past. And one of the things that I guess you would call these war stories. There's always things that have happened in the past that have been good things and have been bad things, and we like to try to show some of them. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was that we use Puppet. Puppet is a great tool. We use to set up environments and set it so that we can bring up an environment on demand and have it be exactly what we want it to be. On this particular instance that I want to tell you about is that we actually missed a step in the process ourselves. Wasn't Puppet's fault, it was our fault. We didn't get the process right. And you'll see that usually when you have an issue of any kind, by the way, it's going to be a process or a tool or a person issue. And I think that'll be underscored as we go ahead. So we did set up Puppet to set up our test environments. It works perfectly. What we didn't account for was the development team would frequently change some of the environment configurations and just not tell anybody. And so you may have noticed this. It's almost proverbial that you go through a development cycle and then you go to your testing cycle and everything's ready, except the software won't work in the test environment. It won't do anything because there's something wrong. And it usually takes a couple of days to get it set up where it works right. Usually the reason for that is environment configurations. So we sat down to try to figure that out. We actually wrote a white paper on it to try to figure out how do we fix this? How do we make sure that we get this under control? How do we get rid of that 2 to 3 day gap? And so we thought of a couple of good ideas. One of the ideas we thought of was to come up with some way to snapshot the development environment before they start and at the end of the development. And so look at the difference and see what changed. And that's a pretty good idea as long as you are able to get a good snapshot. Because sometimes something may change that you don't know about. The other thing that we came up with is, why don't we just require the development team to let us know, let's control their environment. When they want to change something, then they can come to us and we'll change it for them and we'll put it in Puppet and we're all done. That works, but what it does is it kind of slows down the development team. You really don't want to slow the development team down in any way, shape, or form if you can possibly help it. So, we want to get out of their way, let them be creative, let them do what they do, let them figure it out. So what we figured out would be a good idea, and actually we talked to Puppet about this, and they helped us when they said, why don't you let your developers use Puppet as well to manage their environment? And our answer to that was, oh, of course, why not? That's a great idea. So that way, what happens is you actually have a double delivery. You deliver your configurations, and then you deliver your code to the new environment. So that was something that we missed. That was a process issue, but once we got it fixed, it works perfectly. The next item is there's an interesting situation. We were working with a large airline, actually, with a large Java e-commerce application. And while we were there, there was a big deal because one of their competing companies, another airline, was hacked through vulnerabilities in their Java e-commerce application. And of course, the leadership of the company for our client came in and said, well, are we vulnerable too? And we were. The way to think about this is, some of our buddies at Sonatype pointed this out. I really like this idea that if you think about it these days, especially if you're doing a Java application, you're not so much writing an application as you are manufacturing it. You're getting pieces from all over the place, normally from Java Central, that you're using to construct your application with. And so what I've heard, the number I've heard from several different people is 95% of the code in a Java application comes from Java Central. And since those libraries are open source, all different kinds of programmers of varying abilities actually create some of the functions and libraries out there. So sometimes they accidentally introduce vulnerabilities. And another thing that can happen is someone may pull in a copyleft, a piece of code that is marked with copyleft markings, which basically means is whatever you use it in is becomes open source. And no company that I know of wants their software to become open source on purpose, or at least they want it to be on purpose. They don't want to do it because somebody made a mistake. So we were wondering how to eliminate that risk. How do we find out about this? And there are announcements from time to time about things, but they don't really give you a lot of detail of of what exactly is the problem. We learned that, and this was a tooling issue. We learned that Sonatype actually has a product called Lifecycle that actually works almost like a virus detector to pull out those libraries that have vulnerabilities. Also gives you the opportunity to selectively pick libraries. You say, whenever one of my people is looking for this particular library, give them this version, so that you can keep them from using one that has a vulnerability inside of it. Once we figured that out, it was really pretty easy to get that taken care of, and it gives a lot of peace of mind to know that you have that situation covered. So I'll go ahead and I want to tell you, at that same organization, as a matter of fact, we had Jenkins set up to automatically detect code that gets committed in GitHub and build it. And the issue we had was we had 200 developers, which meant we were having builds happen so fast that we had trouble managing them. So we sat down and thought about how do we fix this. And so the first thing we thought of was, rather than automatically detect a commit and do a build, we turned that off in Jenkins, and we basically built a script that ran in cron tab every 30 minutes, and it would go out and check for all the new, check to see if anything had been committed, and if there was anything committed, then it would do a build. So it would build every 30 minutes. And this worked after a fashion, but we realized we had a different problem after that. And the different problem we had was that during that 30 minutes, there might be a couple of dozen commits, and maybe one of those commits would be something that would break the build, but we wouldn't be able to tell what it is right away because they were all in together. All those commits were being just lumped in together in the build. So we modified our script, and what we did instead was we queried GitHub and Jenkins both, and picked out what had been committed since the last time we did a build. And so we would actually take each one of those commits and build it and do them in order. And if one of them broke the build, then we would know, okay, that was a bad one, so we got to stop right there and back that one out. And then we don't keep going because maybe some of those other commits depend on what that person did. So we had to back it out. But it allowed us to not back out everything, but just only the things that happened before the ones that happened after we broke the build. So that worked out pretty well. It worked out pretty well, and we kept it going really fast. We were able to do a lot of things, kept things moving, and so that was an interesting problem that we ran into. The next problem I wanted to talk to you about was another interesting problem. I was the one on this particular project, and we had a global airline network provider asked for some help on disaster recovery. They were looking for someone who could help out with that, and they wanted to make sure the DevOps capability was preserved and they could resume the pipeline as soon as possible. Well, part of what they one thing that's a little bit different. Most of the time when you talk to people about disaster recovery, what they're dealing with is, what do we do if there's a fire? Or what do we do if someone comes in with a chainsaw and a water gun and an axe and takes it and addresses the data center with that? What do we do? This particular organization wanted to go a little bit further than that. So what they did, they started with, what if we had a nuclear attack? Or what if we had an earthquake? So their disaster recovery starts with, are all our employees okay? How about our data centers? Are our data centers okay? If not, where do we want to get some property to rebuild? How do we do that? So they took it really a very serious ground up situation. Now, they have their own cloud, their own private cloud that's worldwide. And so what one of the things they were trying to make sure they could do is, if their version control went down in one of those areas, they would still have version control everywhere else. And you might think about this. If you have not thought about this, consider this. Since we're doing all of our software, we're keeping our software in version control. And now with Puppet and some other tools like it, we're actually taking our environments and turning those into code. Then your version control system, whatever you're using, really turns out to be extremely much more important than it was before. Because if you can get that, if you can keep that, you have a good chance of getting everything back. But if you lose that, you're going to be in big trouble. So they took that to heart, and they bought a product from WANDisco. They had a Subversion multi-site that they used because they were using Subversion pretty much exclusively around the world, and they wanted to make sure that they had that going all the time. So basically, what happens with the multi-site is that periodically they sync up around the world, all the different versions of it. So you have typically at least 3 versions of each one of the repositories. It was interesting to me because one issue with that is that if you only have one copy, for example, you have two instances and they sync up with each other, if one of them goes down, then you've still got the code in the other one, but you can't restart the sync. No matter, even if you get the other one back, you can't restart the sync. So what they ended up doing is keeping 3 copies, 3 instances, so that you've always got one, or you always have 2 that can keep the sync going, and then when you introduce another one, it hooks right in and gets synced right up. So that was really unusual. I don't know how I switched. I must have touched my screen accidentally. So that was basically what that was all about. here's another situation that you will probably run into. This particular one is a people issue, and it was I call it a fear of change, and so on and so forth. We were charged with getting an entire organization for a major company to a big hospitality company, get them moved to a standard version control tool. I might add that you're never really going to have a standard version control tool. Not everybody is going to be on one tool, because what usually happens is you've got the standard tool and you've got the new shiny tool that someone came up with. For a while that was Subversion and Git. Now Git's starting to become the standard tool, and so I'm not sure what the new shiny thing is going to be yet. It's still coming. But we were charged with getting the entire organization moved over, and we were able to prove to them that it was a good idea. They had multiple servers of that particular tool, but they also had other version control tools out there as well. And then there were some folks that weren't even on version control, which I'm finding that that's more prevalent than I thought it was before. That there are still people out there who don't necessarily, maybe they think they need version control, but they don't place the importance on it that we do. So I'm finding more and more, though, that people are starting to come around to that. But you will still find folks that don't have version control. So we were trying to assist these guys to do this. And there was one group that did not want to move to the new tool. And they were both somewhat older people like me that for some reason they liked where they were. They were using a tool called SCCS, a Source Code Control System. Came out with Unix, I think, somewhere around 1979, if I remember correctly. So that would make it about 37 years old now. The tool at the time was perfect because it was the only thing that was there, but it didn't support branch and merge. It didn't do anything really except for you could check out and check in. It would just make copies. It would keep up with the changes that you put in. No way to coordinate it, no way to merge it, no way to do anything like that. And this particular team did not feel they needed to move to another team. And when I talked to them about it, I said, why don't you want to change? And their response was, well, things are just fine, and there's no value in switching. We don't need to. And so what they were doing is there were two developers, and at the beginning of each new release, they would each take a copy of the entire application and put it in their directory structure, and they would make their changes and use SCCS. And then at the end, when it's time to get ready to go into test, they would sit down and manually, that's right, I said manually, merge the tools back together, merge the programs together. And anybody who's done much of this knows that that's extremely error prone. You may find syntax errors there, but you're not going to find code problems. And so they ended up doing this. And I, after trying to give them some advantages, we actually wrote a little bit of scripting around it to try to make it easier for them to use. Still didn't make any headway with them. And so what ended up happening is that I had to report up. I gave a status every week on how many applications were moved. And so finally we got to the point where I said, well, there are 79 moved and there's one that's not moved. And then they asked me the question, well, why aren't they moved? And my response was, they don't want it. And they asked me in really pretty pointed terms, how come they haven't? Why don't they want to move? And I just repeated what they said, and their lead got pretty upset. He said things are not okay. There's a lot of problems there, so I'm going to go explain it to them, and which he did. And so then they came to see me the next day and said, could you please help us get switched over? And the answer was, of course. So you may run into this as you're working with different teams. You may run into people that just flatly refuse to change. They don't want to do anything. And I understand that. Everybody's afraid of change, but you just kind of got to bite the bullet and do it. Another thing we ran across is, probably some of you will relate to this. We were working with a company, and we were running Jenkins on Linux, and allowing any builds. Most of their platforms were Linux, and so it was pretty easy to let that Linux machine that Jenkins was running on actually do the builds. But they introduced, they introduced some Macintosh software. They had some new things they were doing with the iPad, and so they needed to run some things. They needed to build some code for OS X. So we realized, with Jenkins can still run those things. It can still manage those things, but it can't compile them. So what you have to do is put on a build slave and get that build slave to be the type of machine that you need to create the software in. And so they have a series of Mac Minis, and so we hooked them up as build slaves. And so we were feeling really pretty good about ourselves until we found out that some of our Linux builds were failing, and some that had worked really well for a long time. We couldn't figure out why they were failing. And so with a little investigation, we realized that what was happening was Jenkins didn't discern. If you make something a build slave and you don't associate it with a project or with a platform, then it just feels like, okay, I can use this for anything. So it was trying to build Linux code on those Mac Minis. And so that was a lesson we learned, and thankfully have not repeated. So that's something to keep in mind. The next thing you'll see there on the screen is Jenkins and LDAP didn't play well together. This was a kind of an interesting situation. It was really a tooling issue, and you may think about there's always a discussion: should we go open source or should we go with a sponsored tool? And I guess, if somebody asks me, they have to give them the famous consultant's answer, and that depends. What I can tell you is that open source is free at first. If you want to use open source in an enterprise, then there's a couple of dynamics you need to be aware of. One of those is that you're gonna customize it to make it work. And then at some point, since you're an enterprise, you're going to want to hook it up to some other stuff. So you're going to want to integrate it with some other stuff. And maybe get a couple of integrations out there. And then all of a sudden, now you need a team to support it. So you just put yourself in the development business. Now, it still might be cheaper, but it might not be. So what I'm saying is that you should really take a look at it. Before it's not the decision. Some people say it's free, so it's a no-brainer. Well, it really isn't a no-brainer. And the other side of that coin, too, is what I've seen is whenever you have a tool that has an open source version and it has a sponsored version, usually the sponsored version has a lot of things in it that are things for the enterprise. They're things the enterprise wants that maybe a small shop may not want, but a large enterprise would want. And this next one was a pretty good example. In the Jenkins implementation we had, it depended on LDAP to do group permissions. So, and for anyone who may not have experienced this, the best way to do an enterprise tool is to create roles. So you maybe create a group that has certain permissions. And then the way you move people in and out is you just add them to the group, and they inherit the permissions from the group. So you don't have to worry about changing the permissions for an individual every time. All you got to worry about is making sure they're in the right group. And Jenkins depends on LDAP or Active Directory for this. And the implementation we had really did not did not play well with LDAP. Part of it was the client's fault, because instead of having their team that was looked at, the team that was covered by LDAP, instead of having them in a small subset of their corporate directory, they had them scattered all over the place. So if LDAP was trying to validate somebody, they had to look at the entire company user database to find the people to make sure they were permitted. So it's partly that, but partly it was really difficult to set up. And one of the things we found out is that when we talked to CloudBees, which is the sponsored version of Jenkins, they had a really easy to use LDAP configuration, so that made it a lot easier. So that in a way, that's why I spoke for a minute about sponsored versus open source, because sometimes it does make a difference in what you're trying to do and whether or not you'll be able to do what you want to do or not. So the next thing I wanted to touch base about is we hear quite a bit. It looks like I'm really on schedule really well here. We get asked quite a bit, do we need a separate DevOps team? And the answer to that is not really. I'm going to give you more information about that in a second. But what you really need to have is you need to make sure that all of your DevOps roles, all the things that need to be done, are assigned to somebody, and that person needs to be trained, and that person needs to be accountable for that activity. And what I mean by that, just an example, is frequently you'll have a person who is a developer who is in charge of the version control tool. That person is responsible for their development work. They get paid to do development work. They're not responsible for the version control tool. So that even though they're the one that does the work, they're not going to get a bad mark on their record for not doing it well, because they're a crackerjack programmer. So what we say is, if you don't have to have a team, but you do have to have people held accountable for the work that they do in those roles. Now there are several different kinds of organizations that you might see for DevOps, and there's really three basic ones, and I'll talk about those. One is by application, one we call federated, and then one we call shared services. So I'll start with the by application, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. Your DevOps people are part of the application team, and the good news is they have really deep know-how about the application. They know the application inside and out. Part of the cons are that for one, if they want to go on vacation, it's hard to get a vacation. I've played that role before, and I can absolutely testify that you don't get much of a vacation, because your person who covers for you doesn't know what you know, and they're going to call you a lot. So, but it does have the benefit of having really deep really deep information about the application and high availability. The second one we talk about is the federated model, and the federated is a pretty good model. I've worked on this model as well. It still uses a team within the application team, but there is a sort of a thin enterprise team, and what they do is they have standards, and they provide a second point of contact for defects, and then they're the ones that contact the vendor with any kind of problems. That's not a bad model to use. It works pretty well. Where you run into trouble with it is where when the corporation decides they want to save money and they really want to cut back on what services are offered. So that does tend to constrict things. The last model is the shared services model. And this is, if you hear someone say they have a separate DevOps team, that's what they're talking about. They have a team of people who are experts in DevOps and different DevOps functions, and they service They actually service the different applications, so they do all the DevOps services. They do not have typically don't have the deep knowledge about the application, but they do have deep DevOps know-how. They have coverage when someone goes on vacation. You've got another person who's similarly skilled who is also there, who can pick up for them. And I think the other thing is that you have a career path for a DevOps person. If a person is a DevOps person and they like that work and they want to progress through their career there, you can do that if you have a separate DevOps team because it's designed that way. And that is a way to concentrate your DevOps expertise and make sure that it gets better. And you give people the opportunity to progress upward through the ranks. Under the other models, if you're a DevOps person and you want to get promoted, you want to make more money, you have to go do something else. And so you end up losing that skill and you're not using that skill any longer. So those are the three models. I hope that's helpful. And so I got through a little quicker than I expected to, but that gives us more time for questions. So thanks a lot for being here. Jill, I'd like to turn it back over to you for questions that may be coming in.
Okay, thank you, Kim. This is Jill. I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm the operations manager at Zivra. But I was hoping that before we go to the questions that some of the vendors could just give us a quick overview or the latest update, and maybe start with Curtis, if that's okay.
Sure. When you say overview and update, just sort of where we're at.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, so Sonatype, for those who on the call maybe don't know this connection, was founded by the makers of Maven, and so we've been basically in the component management business for the last 10 years. We're the stewards of Maven Central, the place Kim referred to, where a lot of these open source parts come from. And over those 10 years, we've learned a lot about how organizations manage and use them. And it's given rise to that component intelligence Kim alluded to, where we now have a deep understanding of what each component offers us and any known quality defects. And we can share that, we can make that information very transparent throughout the life cycle and help with that whole problem of using good components. So that's sort of where we came from and what we do at a high level.
All right, thanks, Curtis. Let's go to Christian from GitHub.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Christian Weber, and I'm with GitHub. I'm a solutions engineer over there. And I hope that most of us on the call are familiar with GitHub, but if not, we are the largest host of open source software on the internet. We were founded in 2007 to help improve Git as a platform and put a collaboration layer on top of that. Since then, we've become the de facto standard for open source software development, and we've helped encourage methodologies that have helped large open source projects grow. So with that said, we now have we introduced an enterprise product a few years ago that have helped enterprise organizations adopt some of those open source methodologies and take advantage of all of our great collaboration features, such as the pull request, which we came up with, and help enterprises succeed with that. So we've partnered up with Zivra to help with that, and really our focus is all about taking care of the developer and creating a tool that sort of gets out of the developer's way and helps them to work to the best of their ability.
All right, thanks, Christian. Are you finished? I'm sorry.
I'm all done. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's go to James Jones from Puppet.
Hey guys, my name is James Jones. I'm a technical solutions engineer at Puppet. And at Puppet, we were founded in 2005 by a lot of existing.
James, I think we're losing your connection a little bit. James, are you there?
You guys hear me? this. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So yeah, as I was saying, we were founded in 2005 by our current CEO, Luke Knies, really with the mentality that current configuration management solutions just weren't able to scale effectively and really drive change within organizations in a consistent manner. So Puppet is focused on methodologies around infrastructure as code, configuration management, and really allowing you to take all of the principles that have been on the dev side of the house frequently and implement that on operations to be able to manage how you set up and provision machines, configure those machines, and actually deliver software. So our goal is to really allow every company to become great software companies and be able to do that and scale, especially as they start initiatives to move to the cloud, containers, all sorts of other technology types. So definitely happy to see us integrating with so many different great DevOps tools, and as such, I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, James. Let's start with the question and answer now. The first question is from Mark Sutton. If you had orchestration early on, now my question moved here, sorry. If you had orchestration early on, would the process issues you ran into not happened at all or been mitigated? Does anybody want to answer that question?
Trying to get back off mute. I think we need a little more context about which particular item they're asking about. I'm a really big fan of orchestration. As a matter of fact, one of the things I talk to people a lot about is to modularize it as much as you can. You can use an orchestrator to run a huge script and do all kinds of things there. But I urge you to modularize it more. Have a project have a project within your orchestrator do a specific thing, and then hand off the data to the next process. I don't know if that helps or not. Sometimes a process, an orchestrator program can implement your process. If you get your process wrong, one of the things I'm fond of saying is that you automate something and you have it do the wrong thing, it's going to take you where you don't want to go really fast. So typically, if your process is wrong and you use an orchestrator to manage that process, it's probably not going to help. It's probably going to make it worse. But I don't want to say you shouldn't use an orchestrator. You should, but you need to get your process right first. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kim. Maybe Mark can elaborate on his question if he wants to. Maybe we can answer that again. The next question is, it says, I've used Artifactory in the past for managing artifacts for enterprise scale components. Can you recommend an open source tool that is similar?
Yeah, so this is Chris from GitHub. My first thought is when you are using asset management programs like Artifactory, GitHub.com and GitHub Enterprise both natively support GitLFS. For those unaware, GitLFS is large file storage, which allows you to take large assets like binaries, images, executables, audio files, so on and so forth, to be able to store in your repositories essentially pointer copies. So if we think about a Git repository, we can have those stored somewhere else in the file system while still referencing those files. And GitLFS is an open source implementation that ships with Git natively, and the canonical repositories on GitHub.com and Enterprise both natively support that.
All right, thank you. The next question says, how do you handle scaling problems related to Jenkins, open source or cloud-based infrastructure? Any experience that you can share around that?
What kind of scaling problems are we talking about? Are we talking about with environments? Are we talking about with processes? Where are we coming from?
Just a question, they didn't elaborate, just says, how do you handle
Yeah.
scaling problems related to Jenkins infrastructure?
Hmm.
So
Well,
I'm
this is
drawing a
Chris
blank on
again.
that one.
This is Chris again. Maybe I can provide some feedback on that, and then maybe we can
Sure.
spur some conversation and discussion around that. So, when we talk to our enterprise support reps here at GitHub Enterprise, a lot of times we'll get common support issues that a GitHub Enterprise instance is performing poorly in regards to the number of repositories that they have on an instance. A lot of times, when our enterprise support cats, as we call them, are troubleshooting, a lot of times what we find out is that they're using Jenkins for continuous integration, and they are setting up polling jobs that do not scale with the amount of users and repositories that they've set up, and in regards to the build jobs that they've had on the Jenkins slave or the Jenkins master. So something that we recommend when you're starting to scale up your GitHub Enterprise instance with Jenkins at the enterprise level is to utilize webhooks instead of polling the repository. So when we define a webhook, it's that maybe that when a repository has a new pull request or a new push that has been made to the repository itself, we create an HTTP trigger that can go to a Jenkins server and use something like a pull request builder plugin that's available within the Jenkins community to build iteratively on top of that. So rather than polling our server, which can cause performance issues if you've got 50,000 polls happening, which we've seen on some of our enterprise instances, you're actually you're sending data to the Jenkins server rather than vice versa. That's what we've seen in our experience and something we typically recommend.
And
thanks, Christian.
now that you say that, I think of another example. One situation we had was, as most folks probably know, with Jenkins, you have Jenkins keeps an extensive log of everything that happens and keeps up with what happens and what doesn't happen, what completed successfully, what didn't. And so there have been an upswing of tools that are dashboards. For example, you may go into a shop and you see up on the wall, you see a dashboard that shows all the last few jobs that ran and if they built successfully or not. And sometimes if you have a lot of those, the load is not on those dashboards. The load is actually put on Jenkins. So if you have enough of those, you can drag Jenkins down to a stop. You can have Jenkins is so busy trying to service given status that it can't get any work done. So there's something to watch out for. That's it.
Thanks, Kim. Actually, they had asked in the terms of storage and compute. I don't know if that makes any more sense, but we can move on to the next question. Can you recommend any open source alternative to VMware for environment creation?
So I can talk a little bit about what Puppet has in terms of capabilities around that. So generally, Puppet is frequently used for managing an actual operating system after it's been provisioned. But we do also have a lot of resource types to be able to actually create VMware instances, or similarly, if you're building in the cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Compute. And so you can kind of define what machines you want to have exist, if they wanted to be cloned from particular templates, and even going back to that Jenkins question, if you needed to define kind of how you would want to provision Jenkins servers when you do find that you are reaching capacity, being able to easily provision those based upon certain characteristics that you defined in code. So that can help you kind of build up easily and quickly. So Puppet might be a good fit for that.
All right, thanks, James. We have another question. It says, Jenkins is pretty basic out of the box. To achieve a full CI/CD process, many plugins are required to integrate. Do you favor any particular companies or brands?
So this is Chris, and how would we define companies or brands in terms of Jenkins?
I think the question is about the companies that create the plugins.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say, from a GitHub perspective, my favorite plugin is the GitHub Pull Request Builder, which I mentioned a little bit ago. When I'm talking with my customers, I think it's a vital part of developing a automated software development pipeline. Essentially, it's the idea that anytime that we open a pull request or that we reopen a pull request or we add commits to a pull request, we're sending essentially webhook triggers that will call our Jenkins build, our Jenkins projects, and then iteratively build on that, which then can then report back via our status API the result of those builds. That's my favorite one.
Okay, yeah, just to answer from a more of a generic point of view, I don't know that I have a favorite of companies that design plugins. I just think you have to experiment with them and find the ones that work, the ones that do what you want them to do. It requires a little bit of experimentation. You can also Google each individual one and get and find out quite a bit about them. Where they came from. You might develop your own opinions about who's good and who isn't good, or who is not so good, I should say. But to me, the bottom line still lies with, does it do what I want it to do? I don't really care who does it if it'll do what I want it to do.
Yeah, and then
That's
for
my
those that were at
generic answer.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I think something that we may want to talk to the audience about too is the organizations that James and I believe Curtis are a part of as well. And I can't remember if Sonatype was part of this, and if I'm speaking incorrectly, please correct me. But at Jenkins World, there was the announcement of the sort of the DevOps Express consortium of a lot of software vendors like Puppet and GitHub, and I believe Sonatype as well, essentially to help sort of bring this whole to help kind of, in my mind, sort of simplify the whole DevOps tool chain and being able to sort of recommend best of breed integrations. And I think one of the intents of CloudBees, who's sort of the owner of this DevOps Express, is really to help sort of simplify and help recommend best of breed plugins when it comes into the Jenkins community, because I think as a whole, when we work with the Jenkins community plugins, I think because it is an open source community that has not had a lot of curation to it, the plugins aren't, it does take a lot of digging to find, as Kim said, those plugins that work for you, and not always is that search easy or quick. So I think, I think it might be something good to look into that as it evolves and matures. I think that DevOps Express thing will help. The DevOps Express organization will help sort of bring a little bit of sanity to the Jenkins plugin community, and I mean it is not an insult to the community or anything like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is Curtis with Sonatype. Just to piggyback a little bit, we're definitely a part of DevOps Express. In fact, it was us and CloudBees together that sort of co-founded the initiative. And just to get back to the original question, I'd like to start by pointing out that Jenkins 2, the re-release with that new release with the pipelines, is designed to simplify CI/CD pipelines by sort of putting together what they thought was the best common patterns, but it's still flexible enough to break out of it after that. So there's that. Obviously, for scale and beyond, that Jenkins is a good example of a tool that you could start with for free, find your feet, and then when you need more support or more behind it, you can go to someone like CloudBees. So that it offers that sort of pathway too, and they have enterprise-grade plugins themselves that start to solve things like high availability and additional enterprise-type problems that maybe smaller shops wouldn't run into.
Thanks, Curtis. We have another question. Can you comment on how Gradle can be utilized for DevOps?
Let me unmute myself. So Gradle, I mean, let me, as a company that founded Maven, Gradle is very similar, right? So Gradle, basically is another build tool that satisfies the core need here, which is managing your dependencies sort of prescriptively, right? So it provides you a way to tell the system, this is the version of this component that I want to use. And that's the key capability that's needed when we talk about managing these components. You have to start by being in control of exactly which versions you're getting. And in those tools, if used there are ways to use those tools, Gradle and Maven both, where when you ask for these things, you start to get transitive dependencies, and you won't always get it. You won't always be able to know what you're getting in advance. So you have to start to manage it at the app level and start to prescribe each one and get them nailed down. So Gradle is a perfectly fine tool that fits in here too, because it satisfies that core capability. That's really the important aspect, not the tool.
Thanks, Curtis. We have one more question. It looks like it says, where do you feel QA fits into the DevOps initiative? How can they contribute?
I could talk to
the old QA. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I have started a DevOps organization within a large insurance company, so I have a little bit experience. My group was actually in the QA organization, so we used them as a place to launch or sort of organize where we put those people, partially because for political reasons and even regulatory reasons, the appropriate separations of concerns were in place. It also put us in a position to better negotiate with other stakeholders in the organization, like legal and security and audit and ops, right? Because they weren't afraid of us because we weren't developers. So it was sort of key that we weren't in the development team, and being in a QA team sort of immediately put those folks at ease. Having said that, the traditional QA org still has to write tests. There's always going to be a need for some manual testing to discover how the test needs to happen before it becomes an automated test. There's other forms of testing that probably won't lend themselves to automation. So there's lots of opportunities for QA to just probably have to make some adjustments to their skill set, but still plays a vital role, because that, in my opinion, the testing bit is the longest pole in this. We can automate builds, we can do the code pushes, but verifying and validating that your application does all the things it's supposed to do so that you can deploy with confidence, that challenge is no less in DevOps than without it. It's just that if we automate, we can get through it a lot faster and a lot more reliably.
Yeah, and I think go ahead.
I just wanted to comment from our point of view. This is Kim. I've seen what the QA function in a lot of different places. Pure Agile says you should have your testers sitting next to your developer as you pull stuff together. I've seen that. I've seen testing resources on the development team to write continuous integration testing scripts. And at the same time, having a formal QA organization that at some point everything gets thrown over the wall. In a larger organization, you typically still will have a QA organization. I'm sure there are some that don't do this, but for the most part, what I've seen is that they do, because they still want to do some end-to-end testing, still want to do some testing. It kind of comes back to the thing about Agile. There's a big discussion from a lot of folks that say you can't do Agile in a big company. My point of view of that is, yes, you can if that group can meet the requirements of Agile, which is a certain level of autonomy to the development team. So, and a lot of companies are not willing to take that risk. So you still end up with a QA organization. I've seen both. One thing I did notice in QA, one thing that happens if you have, let me give you a little scenario, and this will explain it. When you're developing, say, a website, for example, you're developing this, and you got people writing code, and there are fields and places to click and so on and so forth on the page, and you've got to write tests to manage all that. So there are a number of tools that you can use to, Selenium comes to mind, which you can use to capture information. Qualicia is another one that comes to mind. That you can write a lot of tests. And what happens a lot is the application team will write code, and then they'll ask the test team, will your test this? Yes, it'll test it. Okay, good. And when things get stable, when things get pretty stable and they ask the development team if their test will still work, the answer is almost always yes. And so at some point in time, the development team gets tired of asking, so they don't. And they expect the test to work, and they do. At some point in time, when you have if you have a new release come out, or in the case that I'm thinking of specifically, they did a huge refactoring. They went from a monolithic web program to single-page apps. And when they did this, a lot of things moved around. And so a lot of the tests they wrote didn't work anymore. So now when you do continuous integration, it fails a lot. But you don't know if your code's wrong or if your test is wrong. So you end up with a situation there. So that habit of checking with the QA folks comes back. It's got to be there. So there's a number of things to be thinking about along those lines. And I probably didn't get close to your question, but you probably have a lot of extra information to deal with now.
Thank you, Kim. And thanks again. It is 2 o'clock, so just wanted to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and our presentation is now over. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email as well. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.